There is an island in Canada where the government secretly manufactured anthrax and then opened it to tourists without telling anyone. And that is only one of 12 islands we are about to uncover. Canada has more than 50,000 islands. Most people only know the beautiful ones, which is great if you are looking for scenery. Slightly less great if you are trying to hide something. And as it turns out, Canada has been hiding quite a few things. Some of these islands conceal mass graves. Some conceal biological weapons programs. Some were used to exile people by race. One of them is still illegal to visit, and most Canadians have never heard of any of them. We are starting with the one that hid a secret so dangerous, the people who uncovered it could not believe Canada had done it. Hit subscribe so the next time someone invites you on a scenic Canadian island cruise, you will know which stops to skip. Let us break it down. Number 12. Gros Isle, Quebec. The quarantine island that became an anthrax factory. There is an island in the St. Lawrence River where over 5,000 people are buried in mass graves, coffins stacked 3 deep. That is the part they put on the memorial plaque. The part about the biological weapons took a little longer to come out. Gros Isle sits 48 kilometers downstream from Quebec City. In 1832, the government established it as a quarantine station to screen immigrants arriving by ship. For 105 years, over 4 million people passed through this island on their way into Canada. Most made it. Thousands did not. 1847 was the Black Year. The Irish potato famine had driven over 100,000 people onto ships bound for Canada. They called them coffin ships because so many passengers died during the crossing from typhus, malnutrition, and overcrowding that bodies were thrown overboard mid-voyage. The chief medical officer, Dr. George Mellis Douglas, had requested £3,000 to prepare for the influx. He received 300. By the end of May, 40 ships carrying 12,500 sick passengers were anchored offshore simultaneously. Douglas described one vessel, the Virginius, which arrived on May 28th. 106 were ill of fever, including 9 of the crew, and the large number of 158 had died on the passage. The few that were able to come on deck were ghastly yellow-looking specters, unshaven and hollow-cheeked. Another ship, the Agnes, arrived with 427 passengers. After a 15-day on-ship quarantine, only 150 survived. 2 Canadian priests who entered the ship holds reported being up to their ankles in filth. The wretched emigrants crowded together like cattle, corpses remaining long unburied. The Anglican Bishop of Montreal recalled seeing people lying opposite, the church screaming for water, and a child covered in vermin. The numbers that year are staggering. 5,293 died during the crossings. 3,452 died at the quarantine station itself. At least 5,424 were buried on the island in mass graves. 4 of the station's own doctors died. The mayor of Montreal died. Over a dozen clergy died. 17% of everyone who boarded a ship in Ireland that year never made it out alive. Now here is the part that did not make the memorial plaque for another 140 years. The plaques mention the quarantine hospital. They mention the mass graves. They are considerably quieter about the biological weapons program. In 1942, the Department of National Defense secretly converted Gros Isle into a bacteriological warfare research facility. The cover name was War Disease Control Station. The island's massive steam-powered sterilization chambers, the ones originally built to delouse immigrant clothing, were repurposed for growing anthrax spores at approximately 150 pounds per month. The program included research into anthrax, brucellosis, tularemia, and bubonic plague payloads. In August 1943, several scientists contracted anthrax and had to be isolated at a hospital in Quebec City. A military officer warned the island was infested with flies that could carry spores to the mainland. Canada's chief veterinarian objected that the island was only 6 kilometers from the nearest riverbank. He was overruled. Here is where it gets genuinely absurd. In 1974, the federal government, apparently unaware of the island's wartime role, designated Gros Isle a National Historic Site, and opened it for tourism. Thousands of families visited before the anthrax history became public in 1988. No confirmed records of thorough decontamination could be found. Some sources indicated anthrax growing trays had been dumped into the St. Lawrence or tossed into the bushes. The site was closed and handed to Environment Canada for decontamination, which is a polite way of saying somebody finally asked, "Wait, did we check for anthrax before letting families picnic here?" Today you can visit by boat from Berthier-sur-Mer between May and October. The Celtic cross on Telegraph Hill bears an Irish inscription that reads, "Children of the Gael died in their thousands on this island, having fled from the laws of foreign tyrants and an artificial famine." Beautiful memorial. Just do not ask about the anthrax. And if an island that doubled as a biological weapons lab sounds like a rough start, wait. The next one did not hide weapons. It hid people. Specifically, the people Canada decided were too inconvenient to treat. Number 11, Darcy Island, British Columbia, where Canada sent its Chinese lepers to die. In 1891, Victoria police conducting a sweep of Chinatown found 5 Chinese men with leprosy hidden in a shack behind a store on Fisgard Street. Within 2 weeks, the city had expropriated an island. Within a month, those men were on it. And for the next 33 years, that island became one of the most quietly horrifying places in Canadian history. Darcy Island sits in Harrow Strait, 17 kilometers from Victoria, surrounded by dangerous riptides and submerged rocks. Buildings were designed by architect John T. The Daily Colonist ran the headline, "Effectual Measures Taken to Prevent Leprosy Becoming Rooted in Chinatown." Over those 33 years, 49 people were shipped to the colony. All men. All but one were Chinese. They were housed in units roughly 5 feet by 8 feet, each with a single bed, a table, a chair, and a fireplace. No doctors or nurses were stationed on the island for the first 15 years. A supply ship visited once per quarter, carrying food, opium, and coffins. Let that combination sit for a moment. Food, opium, coffins, 4 times a year. The healthier residents cared for the dying. They tended a 1-acre garden, kept ducks, chickens, and pigs, and cut their own firewood. Filmmaker Eric Paulson told Vice, "When one dies, they had to drag them outside, dig a hole, and bury them." A reporter who accompanied the supply ship wrote, "The wretched beings, some in the last stages of the disease, lined up on the beach and cried like children when we were leaving." Think about that image for a second. Grown men standing on a beach, watching the only boat that comes 4 times a year pull away, knowing it carried the last human contact they would have until the season changed. Now here is the part that transforms this from a tragedy into something worse. White Canadians who contracted leprosy were sent to the Tragedy Lazaretto in New Brunswick, a proper hospital staffed with doctors, nurses, and nuns. Only Chinese immigrants were sent to Darcy Island. This was not quarantine. This was racialized exile during the Chinese head tax era, the same period that produced the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923. Professor Renisa Mawani of UBC stated, "We need to think of Darcy Island as part of a wider atmosphere of anti-Chinese racism that was aimed at securing BC as a space of whiteness and white supremacy." The Dominion Medical Monthly wrote in December 1898, "British Columbia has a leper colony. Its existence is not widely known, for those who compose it are of a race whose affairs never reach the public ear." At least 14 people died on the island. 2 men killed themselves rather than board the steamer. Some attempted escape and presumably drowned. The government deliberately burned the row houses in 1960. Today, the island is part of Gulf Islands National Park Reserve. You can kayak there. 7 wilderness campsites are available. The Parks Canada website describes it as a peaceful retreat, which technically it is, if you do not read the plaque. In 2000, Victoria's first Chinese-Canadian mayor, Alan Lowe, unveiled a bronze memorial reading, "Between 1891 to 1906, these men died on this island, victims to leprosy and prejudice. Visitors have reported what writer Chuck Gould described as very strange experiences ashore. Parks Canada ecologist George Mercer acknowledged the island has an almost mysterious quality to it due to its history. I would say so, but here is what unsettles me about Darcy Island. The supply ship came 4 times a year. Somebody loaded those coffins onto the boat. Somebody signed off on the delivery, and nobody said a word for over a century. If you think that kind of institutional silence is rare, the next island proves it is practically a tradition. Number 10. Partridge Island, New Brunswick. North America's first quarantine station, now sealed behind contaminated soil. There is an island in the Bay of Fundy where the grass once grew so green over the mass graves that locals could identify the burial pits by color alone. Historian Harold Wright, who advocated for the island for over 40 years, reported that in the 1970s, he would regularly come across human bones that had been uncovered by the elements. For nearly a century before Ellis Island processed its first immigrant, ships arriving in the Bay of Fundy were already being diverted here. Partridge Island was established as a quarantine station in 1785. Between 1816 and 1941, an estimated 3 million immigrants, passengers, and mariners were processed on this 24-acre rock. The procedure involved kerosene showers followed by hot water showers while all clothing was steam cleaned. A yellow quarantine flag flew from the lighthouse whenever disease was present. In 1847, the same year that devastated Gros Isle, 16,000 Irish immigrants arrived in St. John, a city with a population of only 30,000. By June, the station held 2,500 patients simultaneously. 601 died on the island that year, another 595 at the Emigrant Hospital. 6 separate cemeteries were established over the station's life, holding approximately 2,000 burials total. The most tragic figure is Dr. James Patrick Collins, a 23-year-old physician from County Cork, recently married, who had studied medicine in Paris and London. He volunteered to serve for £50 per month. He contracted typhus within weeks and died on July 2, 1847, less than a month into his service. His funeral drew nearly 4,000 mourners, reportedly the largest funeral in St. John's history. The Celtic Cross Memorial calls him a martyr to his duty. At one point, all doctors were simultaneously sick. More than 40 bodies accumulated in the dead house before being placed in a mass grave. Today, Partridge Island has been officially off-limits since the mid-1990s. All buildings were demolished or burned between 1955 and 1999. Federal documents reveal 35,000 cubic meters of contaminated soil, petroleum hydrocarbons, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic from decades of coal burning. A 2014 feasibility study estimated $27 to $40 million for public walkway access. Marika Bloke of the Irish-Canadian Cultural Association stated, "Anybody who has ever set foot on it feels that heavy historical presence. For those Irish people, this was the promised land. It breaks my heart every time I think about it." You can technically get there by licensed kayak excursion. Crossing the breakwater on foot is illegal, but according to locals, frequently done. One kayaker who landed on the eastern shore described it this way: "The silence felt like it had weight, like the island was holding its breath. Nothing says heritage tourism like trespassing across contaminated soil to visit a mass grave." But if Partridge Island's contamination came from decades of coal burning, the next island's poison arrived all at once. The Americans built a military base, filled it with chemicals, and when they left, they just left everything behind, including the part that causes cancer. Number 9, Resolution Island, Nunavut, the most toxic abandoned military site in Canada's north. There is an island off the coast of Baffin Island where the Americans built a radar station during the Cold War, left when they were done, and abandoned enough toxic waste to contaminate the surrounding ocean for decades. Canadian hazardous waste specialist Robert Eno described what investigators found. Looking at what you had found there, you would think that Americans took big hoses and sprayed PCB liquid all over the site. Resolution Island covers 1,015 square kilometers. Fog rolls in on average every second day, making it one of the foggiest places on Earth. The warmest month averages only 3.2 degrees Celsius, so already nobody is booking a vacation here. But the weather is the least of the island's problems. English explorer Martin Frobisher landed here on July 28, 1576, the first European to touch Canadian soil in this region. During that same voyage, 5 of Frobisher's men were kidnapped by Inuit near Frobisher Bay and never seen again. Frobisher retaliated by kidnapping an Inuit man who died in England. 450 years later, the island's story had not improved. During the Cold War, the Distant Early Warning Line, a radar defense system designed to detect Soviet nuclear bombers, stretched across the Arctic. Resolution Island hosted Station BAF-5, constructed beginning in 1951. Approximately 200 people were stationed there in United States military service, living in 8 by 12-foot prefabricated modules, enduring temperatures reaching minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The Americans vacated in 1972. What they left behind was catastrophic. Site investigations between 1987 and 1990 revealed that Resolution Island had the highest level of PCB contamination of all former military sites under federal responsibility in the Canadian North. Over 8,000 kilograms of pure PCBs had been abandoned. Concentrations reached 8,000 parts per million. Additional contaminants included transformer fluids, hydrocarbons, mercury, lead, cobalt, nickel, asbestos, and pesticides. Fuel and oil had been openly dumped, creating pathways for PCB migration overland and into Frobisher Bay, where local Inuit fish. 9,000 tons of contaminated waste required removal. Total dew line cleanup across 21 sites was estimated at over $575 million. Resolution Island's share represented approximately 1/3 of the total cost. Nobody lives there. Nobody can. A 25-year monitoring program remains in place. The island's complete resume now includes kidnapping, disappearances, Cold War paranoia, and enough PCBs to qualify as a Superfund site. But at least the fog keeps the view interesting. You cannot be horrified by what you cannot see. Now, every island so far has been remote, abandoned, or sealed off. The next one is the opposite. Millions of people visit it every year. They ride roller coasters on it, they dance at music festivals on it, and almost none of them have any idea what is underneath their feet. Number 8. Ile Sainte-Helene, Montreal. The sunny park hiding internment camps, cholera wards, and a terrorist escape route. Millions of people visit this island every year. They attend the Canadian Grand Prix, ride roller coasters at La Ronde, and dance at the Osheaga Music Festival. Almost none of them know that the ground they are standing on held a cholera hospital with a 50% death rate, a wartime internment camp for civilians, and the departure point for terrorists fleeing the country under diplomatic immunity. Ile Sainte-Helene is a 200,000-year-old volcanic island in the St. Lawrence River. Archaeological excavations reveal indigenous use dating back at least 4,000 years. Pottery fragments indicate habitation by the St. Lawrence Iroquoians, a First Nation that disappeared entirely before European contact for reasons still debated. In 1611, Samuel de Champlain named the island after his 13-year-old wife. He was 31 years her senior, which tells you something about 1611, but nothing reassuring. That same year, a Montagnais leader named Outetukos drowned near the island and was buried there. In 1664, 2 French colonists were killed by Iroquois warriors on the island. The military showed up shortly after and never really left. By the 1820s, a fort had been constructed with a powder magazine holding 5,000 barrels of gunpowder. When the cholera epidemic of 1832 arrived, the fort became a cholera hospital. The epidemic killed almost 2,000 in Montreal, roughly 6% of the population. The military cemetery holds an estimated 100 burials, including soldiers, their wives, and their children. But here is where it gets darker. From July 1940 to October 1943, the fort served as Internment Camp S-43, holding up to 401 men, mostly Italian and German civilians classified as enemy, aliens. Arrests began the day Italy declared war. Prisoners were forced into hard labor, farming, lumbering, chopping trees. Joe Pieri, a Scottish citizen who was interned there, wrote that while life held a semblance of normalcy, the imprisonment of mostly innocent civilians was unjustifiable. And then there is October 1970. During Canada's only peacetime invocation of the War Measures Act, after 468 arrests, and the murder of Quebec Labour Minister Pierre Laporte, who was strangled and his body stuffed in a car trunk, the island served as the departure point for FLQ terrorists fleeing to Cuba. 5 kidnappers were transported to the former Expo 67 grounds on the island, which had been temporarily designated an extension of the Cuban consulate under diplomatic immunity, and flown out of the country. Today you can ride a roller coaster where internees once chopped trees. You can watch Formula One cars where a cholera ward once operated at 50% mortality. And you can buy a hot dog roughly where 5 terrorists boarded a plane to Havana. The island's tourism page does not mention any of this. It leads with festival dates and parking tips, which to be fair is excellent SEO for suppressing a war crime. And if an island hiding its past under amusement parks sounds unsettling, the next one does not bother hiding anything. It just eats whatever comes near it. Number 7, Sable Island, Nova Scotia. The graveyard of the Atlantic that swallows ships whole. There is a sandbar 300 kilometers off the coast of Halifax that has killed over 10,000 people and sunk more than 350 ships, and it moves. Not metaphorically. The sand literally shifts so fast that land visible one day can be open ocean the next. Sable Island is a narrow, crescent-shaped strip of sand, 42 to 44 kilometers long and barely 1.2 kilometers wide. It sits at the junction of 3 ocean currents, directly in the path of Atlantic storms, and experiences 125 days of fog per year. Its submerged sandbars extend roughly 17 miles beyond each visible tip. The first recorded wreck was HMS Delight in 1583. The last known wreck was the yacht Merrimack, owned by Jean Rowe of Montreal, which ran aground on July 27, 1999 at 2 in the morning. In May 2025, Parks Canada archaeologists began excavating a newly exposed historic wreck on North Beach, bearing the British Royal Navy Broad Arrow mark and Bermuda cedar wood. Before the government intervened, wreckers salvaged ships that ran aground, and rumors circulated that vessels were deliberately lured onto the sand and passengers murdered. This led to the creation of the Humane Establishment Life-Saving Station in 1801. By 1895, 5 stations operated along the island's length, with houses of refuge containing firewood, food suspended beyond the reach of rats, and directions. Park ecologist Dan Keeler described the island's instability. In 2016, 6 kilometers of sand and vegetation disappeared from the island's eastern tip after a spate of storms. You would go to the east end, and the island just stops. Where did the island go? The West Lighthouse was moved 4 times, in 1883, 1888, 1917, and 1951, due to erosion. The main life-saving station traveled 22.5 kilometers across the island over its history. The island's 400 to 600 feral horses are most likely descendants of Acadian horses seized during the Acadian expulsion of the 1750s. In 1960, Canadian school children wrote letters to Prime Minister John Diefenbaker begging him to stop planned culls. He amended the Canada Shipping Act to protect them. Today, Sable Island is a national park reserve. Visitors are permitted June through October, day visits only. accessible exclusively by air charter. All footwear must be disinfected. You must stay 20 meters from horses at all times. It is the kind of place where everything is trying to either disappear or kill you. But the horses are lovely. Just do not get attached to any particular beach. It might not be there tomorrow. And definitely do not get attached to your boat. The island has a 350 ship winning streak. So far, we have covered biological weapons, racial exile colonies, contaminated quarantine stations, Cold War toxic dumps, hidden internment camps, and an island that has swallowed 350 ships. If you are still watching, good, because the second half gets worse. The next island is different. People did not just die there. They kept coming back for over 230 years, and the island kept killing them anyway. Number 6. Oak Island, Nova Scotia. The money pit that has killed 6 and counting. There is an island in Mahone Bay where people have been digging for treasure since 1795. Nobody has found it. 6 people have died trying. And there is a local belief, likely invented after the fact, that 7 must die before the treasure reveals itself. Which means, if you believe that sort of thing, they are 1 short. The story begins in the summer of 1795 when teenager Daniel McGinnis found a circular depression beneath an oak tree with a tackle block hanging from a scarred branch. He returned with friends John Smith and Anthony Vaughan. They dug through flagstones, then through oak log platforms spaced every 10 feet to a depth of 30 feet. Local superstition warned the island was haunted by the ghosts of 2 fishermen. They stopped digging. Subsequent excavations reached 90 feet and found layers of charcoal, putty, and clay, then coconut fibers, which was strange considering the nearest coconut trees were 1,500 miles south. Then a stone slab inscribed with mysterious symbols. The most cited translation by Reverend A.T. Kempton in 1949 reads, 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. Skeptics note the stone was never photographed. It vanished around 1912. At roughly 90 feet, the pit flooded with seawater through what appeared to be an engineered tunnel connected to the beach, possibly a booby trap. In 1897, drilling at 153 to 160 feet yielded a cement layer and a tiny scrap of sheepskin parchment bearing the letters V or UE in India ink. The deaths came next. Around 1861, an unnamed worker was killed when a pump engine boiler burst. On March 26, 1897, Maynard Kaiser fell to his death when a rope slipped from a pulley. Then came August 17, 1965. Robert Restall Sr., age 59, a former daredevil motorcycle stunt performer who had been treasure hunting since 1959, was overcome by gas while checking a 27-foot shaft near Smith's Cove and fell unconscious into the water. His son Bobby, age 24, jumped in to save him and was also overcome. Mineralogist Carl Grazer and local Cyril Hiltz both attempted rescue and died. The coroner determined all 4 drowned after being rendered unconscious by carbon monoxide from a gasoline-powered pump. 4 men gone in minutes because 1 man fell and 3 others tried to help. Theories about what is buried range from Captain Kidd's pirate treasure to Knights Templar relics to Marie Antoinette's crown jewels to Francis Bacon's manuscripts. Skeptic Joe Nickel, writing for the Skeptical Inquirer, argues the money pit is simply a natural sinkhole, which if true means 6 people died and millions of dollars were spent excavating a hole that nature was managing perfectly well on its own. A young Franklin D. Roosevelt joined an expedition here in 1909. He never found anything either, but in fairness, he found a reasonably successful backup career. Today, brothers Rick and Marty Lagina run the operation. Featured on 11+ seasons of a History Channel show, treasure hunting requires licenses under Nova Scotia's Oak Island Treasure Act. No definitive treasure has ever been recovered. 230 years of digging, tens of millions of dollars spent, 6 dead, and the island is still just sitting there, keeping its mouth shut. At this point, the real treasure might be the lesson in knowing when to stop. But the next island does not involve treasure. It involves something harder to look at. Because on this one, somebody found the graves, dug them up, and built a carnival ride on top of them. Number 5. Deadman's in Melville Island, Halifax. The prisoner of war graveyard someone built an amusement park on. There is an island in Halifax Harbor where nearly 200 American prisoners of war are buried in unmarked graves. Someone built a roller coaster on top of them. Deadman's Island sits on the south side of the Northwest Arm. The adjacent Melville Island entered service as a prisoner of war prison in the late 1790s during Britain's war with Revolutionary France. During the War of 1812, up to 1,800 American prisoners were held at a time, with over 8,000 American captives passing through over the course of the war. Benjamin Franklin Palmer, a young privateer from Stonington, Connecticut, captured in December 1813, kept a diary. His entry for June 4, 1814 reads, "4 prisoners carried to Target Hill this morning, a place where they bury the dead." Between 1803 and 1856, an estimated 400 people died on Melville Island. They were not buried there. Instead, the bodies were taken across the water to Deadman's Island. Approximately 195 American soldiers and sailors were buried in unmarked graves on Deadman's Island, along with 104 African Americans, escaped slaves liberated when British forces attacked Washington in 1814. French and Spanish prisoners were also buried. During the 1847 Irish famine, more typhus victims were added. In 1907, Deadman's Island was sold to Charles Longley, who built Melville Park, an amusement park. During construction, 3 skulls unearthed while digging were placed on rafters in one room to frighten visitors, which is technically the most honest haunted house attraction ever built. The park closed in 1927. Another operator reopened it as a pleasure park in the 1930s, because apparently the first attempt at building entertainment on a graveyard did not provide enough of a hint. In 1959, a local resident named Edward Bonus found a skull frozen into the bank near his home. In 1998, a 60-unit condominium development was proposed on the burial ground. Researcher Iris Shea discovered British Admiralty records listing names, ages, birthplaces, and causes of death of the prisoners. The story made the New York Times front page. Halifax purchased the island for $200,000 in 2000. U.S. Consul General Richard Riley called it very hallowed ground. Guy McLean of the Northwest Arm Heritage Association stated, "No doubt their loved ones wept, but they seem to have vanished from the memory of the U.S." On May 30th, 2005, the U.S. government erected a memorial tablet listing 188 men by name, rank, and ship. An anonymous poem on the interpretive plaque reads, "Go view the graves which prisoners fill. Go count them on the rising hill. No monumental marble shows whose silent dust is their repose." Today, Deadman's Island is a public memorial park. Annual U.S. Memorial Day ceremonies have been held since 2005. Melville Island houses the Armdale Yacht Club in the former officers' quarters, which is a very specific kind of Canadian repurposing. And if building an amusement park on a graveyard sounds disrespectful, the next island takes it a step further by hanging the dead from chains in plain sight. Number 4, McNabs Island, Nova Scotia, Hangman's Beach, cholera pits, and a moonshine factory. There is an island at the entrance to Halifax Harbor where the British Royal Navy used to hang the bodies of executed mutineers from chains and leave them there as a warning to every ship entering port. The man who owned the island was kept awake at night by the clanging. McNabs Island is the largest island in Halifax Harbor at 395 hectares. Maher Beach, on the island's tip, was used during the Napoleonic Wars to display the tarred bodies of executed sailors and gibbets. Peter McNab, who purchased the island in 1782 for £1,000, reportedly tore down the corpses and gallows with his bare hands because the noise was unbearable. Imagine buying an island and discovering the purchase price includes the sound of dead men swinging in the wind every night. That is a disclosure your real estate agent should probably mention. In 1866, the Cunard ship SS England stopped in Halifax with a cholera outbreak aboard. Approximately 800 passengers were quarantined on McNabs Island. Roughly 200 died, including Dr. Slater, the port health officer. Victims were buried in mass graves at Hugonon Point. The island hosted Fort Ives, Fort McNab, and multiple Second World War installations, including a steel anti-submarine net stretched across the harbor to prevent German U-boats from entering. In 1944, the Canadian Army used McNabs Island as an isolated prison for soldiers convicted of crimes. That defense system created the congested conditions that contributed to the collision between the munition ship SS Mont Blanc and the SS Emo on December 6, 1917, resulting in the Halifax explosion, which killed at least 1,782 people and injured 9,000. One island's defense infrastructure helped cause the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. That is not a footnote, that is a headline. Oh, and during Prohibition, someone built a moonshine still inside a soda pop factory on the island. Because after centuries of death, disease, and explosions, someone looked at McNabs Island and thought, you know what this place needs? Illegal whiskey. Today, McNabs Island has no permanent residents, no food, no fresh water, and no facilities. Since 1991, volunteers have collected over 11,000 bags of garbage. Visitors report sightings at Hangman's Beach and a ghostly horse and carriage traversing old paths, which honestly, given the island's resume, seems like the least dramatic thing that could happen there. And if McNabs Island sounds like the set of every British naval horror film ever made, the next island reads more like a disaster that somebody should have prevented and nobody did. Number 3, Ile Noix, Quebec, where 900 American soldiers died of smallpox in 10 days. There is an island in the Richelieu River where the Continental Army, fresh off losing Quebec and abandoning Montreal, crawled to die in the summer of 1776. They spent 10 days on what was described as a low, flat, brush-covered island dotted with insect-infested swamps. Over 900 soldiers died from smallpox. Thousands more suffered malaria and dysentery. 2 mass graves still sit beneath the manicured grounds of a National Historic Site. Historian Elizabeth Fenn wrote, "There are horrific accounts of men dying at Ile Noix with lice and fleas and maggots crawling all over them. It was just an awful, awful scene." Rumors circulated that the British had engaged in deliberate biowarfare by sending infected soldiers among the Americans. Unproven, but not without historical precedent. The French had built a fort here in 1759. The Americans used it as a staging base in 1775. By 1776, the island had become a graveyard. But the island was not done collecting dark chapters. From July 15, 1940 to January 1944, the fort was converted to Internment Camp 41. The first prisoners arrived aboard the SS Sobieski. All 275 internees were Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi Germany and settled in Britain. Despite being refugees, many of whom had volunteered to fight against Germany, they were classified as enemy aliens and imprisoned behind barbed wire, floodlights, and sentry towers. Let that sink in for a moment. They fled the Nazis. They volunteered to fight the Nazis, and Canada put them behind barbed wire. Today, Ile Noix is open to the public as Fort Lennox National Historic Site, accessible by ferry. It is a popular tourist destination. The mass graves and internment history receive limited emphasis in the standard tour because nothing says family outing like a picnic on a smallpox cemetery they forgot to mention. And if an island hiding mass graves under heritage plaques seems like a theme by now, the next entry takes it to the most extreme latitude imaginable. We are going somewhere no human was ever meant to live, and the government sent people there anyway. Number 2, Devon Island, Nunavut, the largest uninhabited island on Earth, where RCMP officers killed themselves and the government apologized 200 years too late. Devon Island is 55,000 247 square kilometers. That is slightly smaller than Croatia. It is the largest uninhabited island on Earth. Winter temperatures reach -50 degrees Celsius. The growing season lasts 40 to 55 days. The terrain is almost entirely barren rock, and NASA uses it as a stand-in for Mars, which tells you everything you need to know about the hospitality. The Houghton Crater, a 20-kilometer diameter impact site formed 23 million years ago, so closely resembles the Martian surface that the SETI Institute established a permanent research station there. Google mapped the crater via Street View in 2018. The island has since become a target of conspiracy theorists who allege NASA secretly placed Mars rovers there to fake space exploration. Because apparently some people look at the most desolate place on the planet and think, this seems like a cover-up. But the real story is not about Mars simulations. It is about what happened at Dundas Harbor. In August 1924, 3 RCMP constables were sent to Devon Island to assert Canadian sovereignty and curb foreign whaling. They had no radio contact for their first 3 years, no way to call for help, no way to tell anyone they were struggling, only annual supply ship visits. 1 ship per year. That was it. Constable Victor Maisonneuve committed suicide on June 16, 1926, while at Crocker Bay. Constable William Robert Stevens accidentally shot himself while walrus hunting on August 26, 1927. Both were buried in what became one of the most northerly cemeteries on Earth. 2 men sent to the edge of the world to plant a flag. Neither made it home. Then in 1934, the government carried out what is now recognized as a forced relocation. 52 Inuit and 109 dogs were transported from southern communities to Dundas Harbor. The Chikiktani Truth Commission concluded in 2013 that reopening Dundas Harbor made a sovereignty statement at little or no expense to Canada and also brought Inuit to an unpopulated area from more southerly locations that were considered to be overhunted. The relocation was disastrous. The trading post was abandoned after just 2 years. On February 27, 2025, the Canadian government issued a formal apology and a $4.5 million settlement to affected families. Minister Gary Anandasangari stated, "We recognize and acknowledge the profound harm done to your families, your communities, and your way of life. 200 years of history on Devon Island, and not a single chapter of it went well for anyone involved. And finally, the island that ties every thread of this video together. Military secrets, hidden burials, paranormal reports from serving naval officers, a security gate that says you are not welcome, and a massacre so old it predates Canada itself." Number 1. Deadman's Island. This one in Vancouver. And unlike the last one, this island was never meant to be visited at all. There is an island in Cole Harbor, connected to Stanley Park by a timber bridge, where the Squamish people once placed their dead in carved cedar boxes lashed to the upper branches of trees. In 1862, settler John Morton visited and discovered hundreds of red cedar boxes in the upper boughs. One had fallen, revealing a jumble of bones and a tassel of black hair. According to oral history told by Chief Joe Capilano to Mohawk poet E. Pauline Johnson, published in her 1911 Legends of Vancouver, approximately 200 Coast Salish warriors were slaughtered on the island. A southern nation had kidnapped 200 women, children, and elders. 200 northern warriors traded themselves as hostages for the captives' freedom and were then killed. Johnson wrote, "In the depths of the undergrowth on Deadman's Island there blossomed a flower of flaming beauty, but somewhere down in the sanctuary of its petals pulsed the heart's blood of many and valiant men." From the 1860s to 1887, settlers used the island to bury those who could not afford proper burial. Vagrants, prostitutes, outlaws, dead seamen, and 21 victims of the Great Vancouver Fire of 1886. From 1888 to 1892, it served as a smallpox quarantine site. Those who fell ill were sent there. If they got better, they were allowed to return. If not, they never left. Then, in 1899, came the Battle of Deadman's Island. On February 14th, the federal government approved a lease to American industrialist Theodore Ludgate at $500 per year to log the island and build a sawmill. On April 24th, Mayor James F. Garden assembled police on the island before dawn. At 6:30 in the morning, Ludgate arrived with 30 workers and struck the first blow into a sapling with an axe. The mayor ordered, "Arrest them all." Sergeant of Police Johnson arrested Ludgate, saying, "You are under arrest," in the Queen's name. Ludgate replied, "I regret that you have seen fit to adopt this course. You are trespassers on this property." The legal battle raged for over a decade. Ludgate won the final ruling from the Privy Council in 1911, cleared the trees, but his company went bankrupt, and the sawmill was never built. Since 1943, the island has housed HMCS Discovery, the Royal Canadian Naval Reserve headquarters. It is closed to the public, a military base with a security gate on the Stanley Park side. The Musqueam First Nation continues to claim the island. Naval reservists have reported experiences that align with what you would expect from an island containing centuries of unexcavated human remains. In 1991, leading seaman C. Hamilton heard voices and commotion while confirmed as the only person on the island. In 1992, leading seaman J. Eldridge heard rapid footsteps on a staircase and furniture being moved upstairs. The commissionaire confirmed he was alone. In 2015, Vancity Buzz listed it as the #1 most haunted place in Vancouver, which is a title nobody applies for, but the island earned through sheer accumulated history. Here is what is remarkable about Deadman's Island. It is 3.8 hectares, less than 10 acres, and on that tiny patch of land, you have an indigenous tree burial site, a massacre, settler burials, fire victims, a smallpox quarantine zone, a political standoff involving a dawn raid and arrest in the Queen's name, a failed industrial scheme, a military base, First Nations land claims, and enough paranormal reports to fill a Netflix season, all on a rock you can see from the seawall while walking your dog in Stanley Park. Every one of these islands was once someone's crisis, someone's exile, someone's last breath, and in almost every case the response was the same. Close the file, burn the building, let enough time pass that the questions stop. The pattern across all 12 is identical. Something terrible happened. Someone decided it was easier to forget than to explain, and the island kept the secret long after the people who buried it were gone. Like this video, if you learned something they definitely did not teach in school. Subscribe because there are more stories like this, and they are not going to tell themselves. And let me know in the comments which island disturbed you the most. I have a feeling the answers are going to vary. Thanks for watching.